Dear friends and colleagues, we know we are in a very tense situation nowadays, especially with George Floyd's incident that is no longer an incident here in the United States. It is a global call for justice, fair and justice in every place. So to understand, there are many regulations, there are many police related laws. We need to talk and find the answers from experts who are practicing and who have a doctorate degree in criminal justice. In that note, we do have a guest, Dr. Wafeeq Sabir, who has extensive experience and academic practice in this field. So we would like to welcome Dr. Sabir. And first of all, I would like to introduce yourself for our audience, please.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rashid, for having me on, and it's definitely an honor to be with you today and to discuss really something that is, quite disturbing, unfortunately, in our society. But it is something that a lot of people, not just here, locally, nationally, but globally, they're having these discussions, and will continue to have similar discussions for a long period of time as it pertains to policing. And just a quick correction, my doctorate is actually in human services. The concentration was criminal justice. So oftentimes people say that my doctorate was in criminal justice, but I am a professor, an associate professor of criminology, of criminal justice and sociology. So, but thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And it is an honor to have you. And let's look at few questions that, anybody can ask. Nowadays, we hear, many calls, first of all, to defunding police departments. Is defunding police department a good idea based on your opinions? How can you inform us?
Yeah. So I think there needs to be probably an understanding that defunding and disbanding are two different things. And I think what we perhaps hear in the media is we hear the word defunding or see the word defunding, but people are hearing disbanding. And there really isn't a civilized society that I know of where disbanding a police department was done or it was successful. You have to have law and order in every society, and whether it's civilized or not, but you have to have some form of law and order. And so therefore the police serve that function in society. Defunding just simply means that if that budget is, let's say, inflated, in every department, every city is going to have a budget, whether it's the water department, sanitation department, health department, fire department, police department, everybody has a budget. And so you don't take funds away from or remove all the funds from a police department because you won't have a police department. But most certainly what can happen, and probably is going to happen, as a lot of mayors and city officials around the country, they're taking a closer look at the police budget, since we're talking police. And they're saying, oh, well, it looks like they went over budget last year. So perhaps we're not going to allow them to go over budget. We're going to hold them to the budget that has been proposed. That could be a form of defunding. Or if, let's say, the city government decides that, well, we like the police department and we're just going to give them more money this year because we just like the police department. Well, now agencies or governments are starting to say, well, let's take that money that we would have approved and we're going to put it to another department. I think what the conversation, or where the conversation really is going, is just simply taking a much closer look, much more scrutiny, more checks and balances to make sure that the departments are doing what they're supposed to, but not allowing them to go over the budget, especially as it pertains to overtime. And overtime takes up quite a nice slice of the funding, and almost in any entity you're going to find that the majority of the budget is covers salaries.
Yeah, very interesting finding. So, do you think, defunding will decrease the number of police personnel for any city, or it just, shaving off the overtime?
It doesn't have to. You can have a police department, let's say, that has a strength of 100 sworn personnel, and by defunding, what it would essentially do is not allow that department to hire additional sworn personnel. So the defunding can work for you or work against you. So you have, let's say, and I'm just using this scenario, you have 1,000 police officers, but you see that you need 100 more police officers. Okay, if you defund that department, then what you're essentially saying is, well, you still have your budget, but you just can't hire another 100 police officers. That would be one way of looking at it. And perhaps they need the additional 100, but because they remove some of the funds, they're not allowed to hire. And now I think that's where it could come back on certain localities that that department or that city is not allowed to, or they don't have the budget because they were defunded, that they don't have it within their budget to hire additional officers. And as a city continues to grow, most certainly the resources are needed, whether it's fire, whether it's police, whether it's to increase the water, the health of the water, so on and so forth. So there's always increases in budgets, but most certainly it could affect the safety of the city if they can't, let's say, hire additional officers.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. And last question on this topic. If a police department decide to defund for 1 year, would that require that police department to wait 1 more year to get new budget to increase their funding in case population grows, there are more need for new police officers. So do you think there would be a negative impact on the community if there are need and they are not able to provide additional police officers to meet the needs?
Yeah, it could have a negative impact because for every police officer that you hire, then you also have to include, there's a package deal. So in other words, for every police officer that you hire, there's equipment and there's a certain dollar amount that goes to attach to that. So there's a certain amount of equipment, there's training, there are tools, resources, human resources. There are a lot of additional things that go along with hiring really any employee. But when you talk about police officers in general, do you have the fleet? Do you have enough vehicles that are available if you're going to hire additional police officers, which means that now I have to increase the budget to be able to perhaps purchase more vehicles. So there's a much bigger conversation that has to be held before I think governments start to defund, and I say defund them in a healthy way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we hope, there a fully holistic, analysis done before any police department decides to defunding their, institute or budgets. So thank you very much for valuable information. And then our next question, is social activism a step in the right direction regarding police brutality?
For sure. I think activism, if it's healthy, activism is healthy for really any society, because it gives a voice to the people, and that's really what activism is. Unfortunately, it has like a bad connotation unfortunately, when it comes to minority communities. So if you are a Black activist or a brown activist or an activist, you know, in general, that it's like, well, you're a bad person because you're speaking out against the government or you're speaking out against something that perhaps you should just be quiet about. So activism has its place in society, and when it's done properly, it's very effective.
Yep, we know our Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a great activist, and many positive things came out from his efforts. And we definitely want to remember pioneers like him. So and also we need to understand the peaceful way of protesting and trying to protest, so that there is no mixture of violent protest versus non-violent protest. So in that sense, we want to get attention of the authorities, so that all kind of police brutality, whether in the United States, because I have seen many other newses like in UK, France, and Germany, they have pretty much similar techniques when it comes to apprehend somebody. So hopefully, any kind of techniques that are not aligned with the humanity, or any other brutality, that might be reviewed. What would be your opinion in terms of global attention, in terms of police brutality, and the protest we are seeing nowadays?
Sure. I think that one of the greatest things that's happening now is we live in a world of technology where we're able to disseminate information really across the planet in a matter of seconds. And for us being in America, that we are able to push information to other parts of the world, and inform them as to what's going on, and vice versa. I think oftentimes we rely on social media to now inform us as to what's going on in various countries. And so I think first of all, when it's done right, and the media outlets are fair, that we get a more accurate picture, and understanding as to what's going on. Kind of like what I said before, that sometimes people see the word defunding, but they hear disbanding. Um, and so being really, really clear and having people that can speak to it in an intelligent manner, I think is really, really beneficial. And the other thing with this is, our children that are growing up, oftentimes they only know of what they have been told. But guess what? They now have the similar abilities to pull up their cell phones and be just as informed as to what's going on, and to hear accounts, or to hear the stories, and to receive information and come to some conclusion about themselves. I think the activism that we are seeing now is similar to perhaps what may have occurred here in the did occur here in the United States in the 50s and the 60s. Something that a lot of people sometimes forget is, because you mentioned Dr. King, is Dr. King was a young man. He was not a middle-aged or an elderly man who was marching. He was a young man in his 20s, and I forget his exact age when he was assassinated, but he was not an old person, an elderly person. And literally 90% or so of the individuals that marched with him or were activists, they were either teenagers, like straight out of high school, or they were young college students. So what we've seen over the years, even in other parts of the world, are young people that are being involved, and they want the changes to occur because they see how this is affecting or will affect their generation and the generation after them. So I really appreciate the fact that we can see this stuff firsthand. It's just disturbing when we see officers or a person that has been attacked or has been violated, and we get to see this on our cell phone. It's very disturbing. I think that is the thing that has disturbed a lot of the Black and brown communities in general when we saw the George Floyd. But the George Floyd is one of many individuals that has occurred to almost in an exact form. Like, this isn't the first time that police officers have placed their knees or their boots or any other parts of their body on a person, and that person died in police custody. I remember years ago on the department that we had an incident where a person in the city of Fort Worth, they died in police custody, and it was due to what they call hog tying. So hog tying is when you take a person and you restrain their wrists behind their back, their arms, and then you tie their ankles, and you connect their ankles and their wrists together behind their back. And so the reference is called hog tying. Well, unfortunately, when you hog tie a person because they're violent and you have arrested them, that person is typically laid like on their chest. So they're laying down, okay? Well, if you lay a person down on their chest in the street or some other hard object surface, they can't breathe. And I don't even have to put any weight on that person to make it difficult for them to breathe, because all of their body weight is laying down and their arms and their legs are behind them, so they can't balance themselves. So in the city of Fort Worth, there was an incident that had occurred, and this individual had a mental health issue, and he was hogtied. And before they knew it, he died. You know, it was an in custody death. The officers didn't beat him, they didn't shoot him, they didn't go through all of those measures that perhaps that we may see now, but they did something that caused his direct death. You probably have not heard of that situation, and most residents in Fort Worth, Texas probably have never heard of that. Why? Because we didn't have the technology. We didn't have cell phones with cameras on. We didn't have all of that to be able to see it at firsthand. But I guarantee if that were to occur now, family members would have recorded that. We would have seen that exactly how it happened, and there would be no dispute as to what the officers did. But this happened some years ago when we didn't have access to this. So things are starting to give us more insight and give us, as they say, firsthand accounts for the most part, especially if it's live, firsthand accounts as to what's occurring and how it's happening to citizens.
Yeah, thank you very much. Was that a public news at that time, or it was just it didn't come into media at that time at all?
I believe it was published in the newspaper, but that was it. You know, and like I said, there are a lot of in custody deaths that occur and will continue to occur. Like I said, but the advantage that we have now is that almost everyone has a cell phone, and so people are more quick to record these incidents when they can.
Yeah, definitely. And do you, personal opinion, do you believe all the police policies need to be reviewed, to ensure that not only it is safe for the suspect, which they are trying to apprehend, but also for police officer who are trying to, apply those policies are also safe. So the example you have provided where the police officers practically applied the rules the way he or she is supposed to apprehend an individual suspect, not take any blame for conducting what he or she is supposed to conduct, but consequences, fatality or something like that. Do you think policies needs to be reviewed?
So, there are some very very good commanders and police chiefs and police commissioners, etc., that conduct annual, or at least every 2 or 3 years, they conduct reviews of their policies to make sure that they are following, or the officers are following the rules. As a matter of fact, in order to have what they call a peace officer's license, which is a license that every officer must maintain to continue to work in a municipality, that's also governed by the state at the state level. And so the state will set standards as to what the police departments in those in that state can do. The state will set policies, and then the local police departments can also make their own policies. So the state does a pretty good job, but they, once again, they leave it to the local departments to make adjustments to their own policies. So to go back to your question, policies should always be revisited. And I think they should be revisited from outside entities as well, because if I work within this agency, oftentimes I am not going to change a policy because it's going to cause discomfort, it's going to cause additional training, and therefore that might affect the budget as well. I think what we're seeing now is going to be a much more aggressive approach towards policies, policy building, reviews, and kind of where I'm going with this is some cities really kind of push against what they call citizen review boards, or police monitors, or police boards. And essentially what they're doing is giving access to citizens, people who are not police officers, but giving access to a board of individuals like yourself. You could, as a scholar and researcher, you could perhaps, let's say, or would qualify to be on one of these boards, and there would be a head of that board and an office, and perhaps there's a salary attached to it or whatever, maybe not, but you would have the ability to look at the policies of that department and then make the recommendations if you feel that the policies need to be changed at any. So unfortunately, we live in a time where we're not as proactive. We're much more reactionary. And this is, I think, problematic, that we are very reactionary and we're not being proactive. So it is quite interesting to see police departments saying, oh, well, we're going to ban chokeholds. And I'm like, okay, this is 2020 and you're just now coming to this understanding that you should ban chokeholds. Like, there's plenty of research out there that says how chokeholds will typically lead to an in-custody death. So it's really disturbing to see and hear that a lot of police departments are saying, well, we're going to ban them now. Well, why are you banning them now? Because you're what? You're not taking a proactive stance. You're reacting to the activism. You're reacting to the protesting. You're reacting because of political pressure. And that's where we need to change. We need to change and not wait until someone is killed or hurt, or civil rights have been violated. You need to be more proactive. And I think that, to me, is the essence of police reform. It's being proactive and not waiting until something occurs and then you come up with a new policy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I echoed. I also have seen similar news came from like UK or France. They're saying suspend all chokeholds, to make sure, another incident doesn't happen, while this is going on. So, I mean, we appreciate good policing. Our brothers and sisters sometime are part and members of the police forces. I mean, with the way new revolution going on right now, what would be your advice for the young graduate who are, freshmen, college graduates, or who wanted to join the police forces, but with this incident, it seems like their career have a very negative impact on it. So how would you, encourage them, or, suggest them in terms of their career endeavors in police forcing?
That's that's a great question. I think that this is a profession that a lot of young people, especially minorities, do not enter, and they don't enter because maybe there's a misunderstanding, or they've just been turned off by police departments for so long that they dare not enter that field. But when you talk about criminal justice is has like three layers to it. So policing is just one part of it, but you also have your corrections, you know, your jails and prisons, and then you have your court system. And I would say that for those, and I'm just speaking as a minority, for those that perhaps don't want to enter the field of policing, the profession of policing, hey, law school. Perhaps you just kind of can wrap your mind around understanding law or being a legal professional person. That in itself could be more beneficial than you being a police officer, because at that level, being in the course of being a judge, you have the ability to really, I think, be more effective than that one police officer who may just answer calls and write tickets on a daily basis.
Yeah, great. So, do you think more minorities, I mean, should volunteer to join the police forces to ensure that there are diversities? As you have mentioned, that they don't have, power to change policies the way policing should be done. However, if they join, they climb up the ladder, hopefully, or they can request some kind of review of the policies if they observe this is for the humanity, for their own families, for the global community. What would be your opinion?
Yes. Um, and so kind of at the top of the interview, and I don't know if maybe we were clear because I didn't really go into my background that much, but I served in a local police department for 25 years. In all 25 years, I was a police officer. I stayed at the rank of officer, so I didn't promote to administrative levels where I could have perhaps changed policies. But for me, I say that I was very effective in the things that I did, but I made sure that I didn't violate people's civil rights. And if everybody took that approach, then a lot of what's happening would not occur. And so forth, you have a lot of intelligent people who can make those policy changes as they need to. But I always, and this is probably just one of my biases, that I feel that policing is one of the greater professions, if it's a professional policing organization. But understand that as a minority, that the vast majority of police departments are going to be led by white personnel. And so once again, if I want to make a change or help offset what's going on in that community, maybe this is my contribution by perhaps becoming a police officer. But most certainly, I've always been an advocate of minorities being in policing and minority females, which is a whole probably another conversation, because this is not a profession that is dominated by women. It is a very, very male dominated and white male dominated profession. And you find that when women of color get into this profession, they're very effective. It's very beneficial to the community. It's beneficial to young girls growing up, and they're trying to figure out where they fit in society, and they see a female that's in uniform. I think that's highly beneficial to their spirit and to their self-esteem. But you just don't see it. And so, there are other fundamental reasons why that doesn't take place. One of the reasons is really not promoted. It's not promoted to just women in general.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your personal background. And also, I want to note that the trend that we have seen, I mean, United States and Europe might be a little bit more diverse, but there are homogeneous societies like in Asia and Africa where minority isn't a factor, but the way
Right.
policing policies goes, it like universal. So in those countries or regions, it's not about minority or majority, it's about the individual, their characteristics, their morale, the way they get, motivated to apply and practice the authority they have. That's questionable. So do you have any observations from non-diverse societies in the world
Yeah.
that?
And what we tend to see in those parts of the world where everyone looks alike. So the community is of Asian descent, the police department, the fire department, the entire government, everyone is of Asian descent. So you don't have different racial groups that are involved in that. But what you do see is people who are in authoritarian positions like police officers, political officials, that they go through what is known kind of in the academic world as social dominance orientation, and it's simply it's a theory and a concept that says that if I'm put into a position of authority over others, then I have this orientation that I am better than you and that I have total rulership over you. And it becomes this mindset that even though I came from the same community or I'm from the same racial or ethnic background, I'm better than you, because guess what? I can take away your rights whenever I want to. And once again, it causes problems throughout the world. And a lot of people would refer to that as the have and the have nots, or I, versus them. And it's something that you see just around the world. And it's like, what do you do about that? That's a very heavy thing to think about, that you and I could be from the same community. We share the same language, the same religion. And yet, if I have a uniform and you don't, then I may treat you differently because I've been granted the authority by the state or the government to put you, as they say, put you in your place and put you and separate you from me. But you see that globally. I think it does take a strong minded and a strong willed person or persons to think a little different, but also do your job. And that's the other really key piece to that, is whether it's I versus them, I have a job to do, but I'm going to do my job in a safe and in a professional manner and not violate other human rights.
Yeah, thank you very much. Looks like we are almost at the end of our time, and we really appreciate. Hopefully, our audience will be able to utilize the information from this interview. And thank you very much, Dr. Sabir, and we wish you success in everything you are doing in your life. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.